Okay, and then Caroline, let's hand it over to you.
Okay, perfect. So you should be able to see just the presenter view.
Yep.
Okay. So feel free to interrupt me, Danielle, if there are like questions or anything like that, but I'll just sort of minimize all of our faces so I can do
Okay.
the presentation. Well, hi, everybody. Caroline Helson, as Danielle mentioned, I am the Climate and Health Program Manager at MDHHS. And the MyChat program actually started quite a long time ago in like 2013-ish. Really focused on keeping a pulse on how the climate is changing in the state of Michigan and how communities within the state are adapting to those changes, particularly as it impacts health of Michiganders. So today we're going to go over the climate trends in the state. Then we're going to identify how those trends pose a risk to human health. Um, and then what general populations are at highest risk from those health impacts, and then go over some tools where you can get more specific data outside of that general population list, and then go over some resources, health education resources that are available to you all. So the agenda pretty much follows those same objectives. And the climate trends we will cover today are temperature, precipitation, air quality, and vectors. So like mosquitoes and ticks. So first, really high level overview looking at the Great Lakes region for temperature and precipitation. This is from GLESA. They're out of the University of Michigan. They're also affiliated with NOAA. Average temperature from like 1951 to 2021 period has rose by 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, in Michigan specifically 2.6. And then the frost-free season has increased by 16 days, so more days with no frost in that same time period. And then total precipitation, an increase of 16%. So that's including, both rain and snow. Michigan, that number is so similar at 15%. And then heavy precipitation events. So not just the number of times it's raining throughout a year or something like that, but how heavy is the rain or how heavy is the snow for that single event. That's increased by 37%. So if we dig a little bit deeper into temperature, what we're seeing here is the graph with the trend line of that steadily increasing temperature across the state. This is annual average, even though, of course, you see the variations from year to year. So with climate, we're thinking more like 30-year time periods. That's what National Weather Service will call the climate normal, is the averages of the last 30 years. So in the Great Lakes, so this graph is showing Michigan in general, but from the GLESA data, it's mostly Great Lakes overall. So the northern areas of the region have seen the greatest increases in temperature and are expected to see the greatest increases continuing into the future. And the rate of warming is fastest during winter, with many areas seeing twice the annual rate of warming. So warmer winters as compared to warmer summers. And then I think anecdotally, you all might find that that's your experience here in Michigan. And this trend is anticipated to hold through the first half of the 20th century. Beyond 21st century, beyond mid-century, though, we might see summer and spring temperatures have greater increases compared to winter and fall. And then overnight low temperatures have also increased slightly faster than daytime high temperatures. And the reason why we care about overnight low temperatures is thinking about the relief that people are able to get overnight to cool down in between hot days. And then the period of the year between the last winter freeze and then the first freeze of the following winter, so that's that frost-free season, has increased by 9 days in the Midwestern US. And then here we're looking at precipitation. So similar trend line, we see that slight increase. And then while there are increases overall, they really do vary by region. So like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, some areas of Northeast Wisconsin and Northern Minnesota have seen actually decreases in precipitation. But then you see greater increases in the more southern areas of the Great Lakes. And lake effect snowfall in particular is expected to increase until mid-century, so the 2050 mark, after we're projecting more rain during the winter season. And then, like I mentioned earlier about those extreme precipitation events, those are becoming more intense and more frequent. So in the Great Lakes region, which is comprised of 8 states, the amount of precipitation falling in the heaviest 1% of precipitation days increased by 35%. So when you're looking at those really, really heavy precipitation days during the year, it's even more rain that's coming during those days or other types of precipitation. And then when we're thinking about these precipitation and what kind of storms, like what are we really looking out for? So it's important to note that the frequency of severe storms, such as like thunderstorms, heavy rains, and snow, that might increase. The occurrence of other events like hailstorms, tornadoes, and ice storms are a little bit more uncertain to project. So as a planner, as a community organizer, really keeping an eye on how the research is evolving as it relates to those different types of events, but definitely thunderstorms, heavy rains, and snow. If we're looking at the air quality, particularly PM 2.5. So PM 2.5 is like particulate matter that's very, very tiny from vehicle emissions, power plants, industry, construction sites, also wildfires, dust storms, that kind of thing. You could think about the like 2023 Canadian wildfire smoke event. Overall, air quality has really improved. This is looking from 2001 to 2020. And even if you go back like to the 1970s, you'll see an even more significant improvement in air quality. But it's still something to keep an eye on. And especially when those poor air quality events do happen, we do see health impacts, which we'll go over later. And then the last bit is climate trends related to vector-borne disease. So this is a risk map for Lyme disease, and the risk increases when there are more vectors present. So on the left-hand side, in 2002, there are counties with known risk for Lyme disease in the dark red. So like at least 2 confirmed exposures. Black-legged ticks with the Lyme bacteria were identified. And so you can see just those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 counties on the 2002 map. On the 2024 map, it's almost the entire state. So we can see how that has increased. And while some of that may be attributable to climate change, we do think that, with like land use and just other factors, we would have anticipated tick spread anyway. But it certainly doesn't help to have those longer, warmer seasons for both ticks and mosquitoes. Okay, so getting into the health risks of the 4 that I just mentioned. For temperature-related health impacts, heat-related illness is the term that we use. That encompasses both heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And then cold-related illness, hypothermia, and frostbite. So those are the main ones we look out for. There's a syndromic surveillance system called Essence that tracks emergency department visits for heat-related and cold-related illnesses. So we try to take a look at that in their respective seasons. And usually we're seeing, we really try to pay attention to the heat index, so like the temperature plus humidity, but generally, like when you're getting above 80 degrees, certainly when you're seeing the multiple day events with no relief in between. So when we start to see more ED visits. Precipitation related health impacts. So this one, thinking about those storms, whether or not it's rain or snow, the sort of more direct impacts, physical injury from the storm, drowning, but indirect is something that people don't always think of as much. And that's like carbon monoxide poisoning. So if power goes out and people are using generators improperly, what that might, cause a CO poisoning event, an unintentional one in the home. Also, mental health impacts. So from repeated storms, especially like repeated flooding in Southeast Michigan is one example that we've really seen, thinking about having to continuously recover, look out for and also financially deal with the impacts from storms. And then also respiratory irritation from mold. So really trying to spread awareness about how people can be cleaning up their homes after a flood, and how to take a look out, be on the lookout for mold. Okay, for air quality, we are looking at the ED related, emergency department related visits. We really look out for air quality when we see like high PM 2.5 events like we did with wildfire smoke, are like asthma related visits. But poor air quality can also impact other areas of the body, causing stroke, exacerbating heart disease, exacerbating COPD, lung cancer, pneumonia, and it's also linked to adverse birth outcomes, like including low birth weight. So this is actually a fairly new area of research, where just more and more is coming out. So we try to keep an eye on that as more information comes out. For vector-related health impacts, for ticks, we're thinking about Lyme disease. That's the sort of more well-known one by the public, but there's also anaplasmosis and babesiosis. Cannot pronounce that one. And then for mosquitoes, West Nile virus, and then also EEE. Michigan has seen, variations of both of these. And especially like if you want to just take a look at some of our press releases, you can Google some of the historical information we've shared when there have been an uptick of cases of EEE. Okay, now here for identifying high-risk populations, like I said before, we'll talk a little bit about general populations that I can identify via literature, health literature, but then also go over some tools where you could find a little bit more specific information. So with climate change, I think what sometimes sort of like the main underlying theme that we like to highlight is that it's really a risk multiplier. So if you already have certain existing health and social inequities, or you're already experiencing certain health and social inequities, climate change will exacerbate that situation. And, with that, just really recognizing that the impacts of climate change are not equally or fairly distributed across people or communities. Like certainly everyone will be impacted by climate change in some way, but definitely the varying impacts on health are significant. And then climate change action. So a lot of what, for example, Eagle does with their climate mitigation work, so separate from adaptation, they're really focused on reduction of greenhouse gases. That also has co-health benefits, health co-benefits, and in improving health equities. So there's just a lot of ways, whether or not you're thinking about adapting to the changes that are already happening or trying to mitigate by lowering greenhouse gases that we can really address health inequities. So here, what you're looking at is a graphic that shows climate vulnerability and how the sort of field of climate defines that. So in the middle, climate vulnerability is the intersection of your exposure. So the exposure a person has to a certain climate hazard like heat or floods, how sensitive they are. So the degree to which someone could be negatively impacted, and then their adaptive capacity or their resiliency. So their ability to change, respond to a climate hazard. And I'll show some examples on the next slide. So for exposure, we're looking at things like outdoor workers, especially we're currently doing a lot of work around outdoor workers and heat. Those who are houseless, athletes exercising outdoors, or like students being outdoors for yard play, that kind of thing. And then those living in high exposure areas. So if you're in a flood prone area or you are living in an urban heat island with not a lot of tree canopy coverage. And then sensitivity. So just kind of go back and remind you the degree to which someone could be negatively impacted. So you're looking at things like, do you have an existing respiratory related illness or cardiovascular disease? Infants and children have a higher degree of sensitivity, as do older adults, pregnant people, people who live alone. And that for that one, a lot of that reasoning is due to perhaps like a lack of people checking on them or connection to being able to sort of get help if they are in a situation in which they need help. Certainly that's all people who live alone, but it is a subset that we try to keep track of. And then people taking certain medications that impact the body's ability to regulate temperature. So one example of that is actually some antipsychotics and some antidepressants. They might impact the body's like physiological ability to regulate temperature. So keeping an eye on that. Making sure people are discussing that with their doctors. And then people with disabilities, a lot of that relating to access to resources to adapt to an event, and then also things like they're reliant on medical equipment, that kind of thing. So adaptive capacity, people without tools to mitigate impacts. So air conditioning, properly sealed housing, indoor filtration, the latter two really thinking about like rain, floods, poor air quality. And then people without the financial resources to mitigate impacts and people without healthcare access. So how could we kind of dig into this a little bit more for our communities, our counties, our cities? These are a few tools. Neighborhoods at Risk is a tool by Headwaters Economics. And what you're seeing here, this is just a screenshot, but what you're seeing here is you can filter by, you can like slide this to the percentage that you want to take a look at. People over 65 years, people with disabilities, households with no cars. There are some other characteristics that you can take a look at. And then the climate exposures, they have 5 different climate exposures. Wildfire, they actually just added. So the way they define that one is the percent of homes exposed to wildfire in tracts with moderate or higher wildfire risk. For flood properties at risk, with these filters here, you're seeing like 10%. That is percent of properties in the census tract potentially affected by 1 in 100 year flood events. And then like, for example, heat, no tree canopy, that's 51.9% of this map. That's the percent of tract covered. Oh, no, impervious area, sorry, 2.5%. Percent of tract covered by surfaces like roofs, roads, parking lots. So thinking about that in terms of your lack of ability to, lack of that area's ability to get relief from the heat. And also flood risk, that increases flood risk as well. the Empower map. So this is a federal resource from HHS. So it's looking at the millions of Medicare beneficiaries who rely on electricity dependent, durable medical and assistive equipment, um, and or certain essential healthcare services to live independently in their homes. So when severe weather, storms, cause prolonged power outages, that can be really life threatening because they rely on that electricity dependent medical equipment. And so this map shows the total number of Medicare beneficiaries who have had an administrative claim for one or more types of that electricity dependent medical equipment and devices. So taking a look at that, where those folks are located.
And is that tool still current right now? Can we access that on the federal government?
Yeah, it's still accessible.
Okay.
It looks like it's still being updated,
Okay.
although it's not as obvious how often they're updating it, but at least there's historical data to look at.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Poweroutage.us. You could view power outage information by county. We use this a ton during the northern ice storm that just happened recently. You can see the outage scale by color, and then it gives you a list of actually like just the different providers if you needed to know, like consumers versus DTE or something. But it helps us at the state level to prioritize like which counties we're reaching out to. And it might help you just in terms of like just, and if you're like just thinking about the perspective of one county, seeing sort of like how fast power is being restored and the number of people who are impacted. So this one, related to your question, Danielle, the heat and health tracker from CDC is no longer being maintained. So no new data is going to be added. However, the old data is still up. So if you enter a zip code or your county name, you can see things like the historical heat and health burden percentile rank. So, for example, if I look at Muskegon County, I'll see darker shaded areas where they might be a little bit more impacted within Muskegon by heat. And they use emergency department data. And then I can also overlay a filter like where are the public schools in relation to that, where are the daycares, where are the hospitals in relation to the areas of the county that are most impacted by heat. So that's still a somewhat useful tool. The FEMA National Risk Index. So I think, there's still the industry sort of talks a lot about how what's the definition of like a 1 in 100 year flood event or 1 in 500 years or whatever. I think there's some updating that might need to be done, and like the flood prone areas, some of that data might be a little bit outdated, whereas sort of the risk is greater than some of these tools might show. However, these are still helpful to take a look at. Like, for example, we're looking at winter weather risk, and they're like sort of red or orange are higher winter weather risks, and then orange being relatively moderate. And yeah, so they are also looking at like expected annual loss, social vulnerability, community resilience. Filters are part of that too. So rounding out our resources, there are two more here. Eagle has an air quality summary report. So we're looking right now, PM 2.5 in 2017 across the state, darker areas, you can see where there's a higher concentration, so tons per square mile. And Eagle, I think, does this report annually. If not every couple of years. But anyway, it's a great report, very detailed. Highly encourage you all taking a look at that and I'll make sure Danielle has those slides and those links. The last one, Easy ID. So their surveillance summary, Easy ID is emerging zoonotic and infectious disease team within MDHHS. They also have a report that they publish periodically. And what we're seeing here is rates of Lyme disease per 100,000 residents. And then this is 5-year incidence by county, so 2019 to 2023. The highest being Dickinson, Baraga, Menominee, Iron, and Ontonagon. And then, yeah, so you can sort of just a glance at some of the counties that might be a little bit lighter versus these like darker, higher incidents. So what kind of resources are we looking at? So I think we broke this down into just the importance of talking about it. I don't think I need to sort of preaching to the choir a little bit when I say that, but I'll show you some information about why we say it's just important to start the conversation. And then I'll actually show you what we have within our team that you can, freely use in your counties. And I don't have the link in this presentation, but I will, when I'm done, grab a link to where you can actually order some free copies of a couple of we have 2 air quality resources and 1 heat related resource that you can order free copies of. So talking about it, 70% of Michigan adults know global warming is happening. No county has less than 58% that believe global warming is happening. And this is from the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. They do this nationally, break it down by county, and just have a ton of really rich data. However, despite that like 70 and 58% number being on the relatively higher end, only 35% of Michigan adults are discussing global warming occasionally or often with friends and family. And I will make a note, the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, I think, started many, many years ago when the phrase global warming was more prominent. So I think they've just stuck with that phrasing as they continue to do their data update every year. Then there was also a national poll on healthy aging that revealed that 59% of people aged 50 and over are concerned about how climate change could affect their health. And that was even actually higher among those who had recently lived through a weather emergency event, such as like wildfire, extreme heat, severe storm, power outage, etc. So really thinking about like as people start to experience more and more of these events impacting them directly, they'll start to make the connection and feel a little bit more concerned about it. Here are the communications materials I was talking about. So our fact sheets, we break them up into what climate hazard we're referring to. So cold health and safety, heat health, flooding. Flooding, that series is actually broken into like before, during, and after a flood. And then relatively new is wildfire smoke and our health resources. We talk a lot about creating indoor clean air spaces, how you can do that with do-it-yourself air cleaners or a portable air cleaner that you purchase. We talk about in that fact sheet masking during high poor air quality events, that kind of thing. And how to even go like check air quality on airnow.gov, that kind of thing. All of these are available at michigan.gov/climate and health, like the digital versions. Then I'll drop the link for the printed copies of 3 separate resources. And we've also recently started, this is you're seeing a picture here on the screen, this one, of a comic series called Talk About It. So this one models a conversation with a parent and their child at the doctor's. concerned about heat and air quality, um, and asthma. So for their child. So just, starting those conversations with physicians and um, yeah. Seasonal resource packets. So I think these are super, super practical for anyone to use in a community, no matter what your role is. We break it up into fall and winter, spring, and then summer. And it has just general information on what climate hazards can pose a risk during that season. And then it has all of our fact sheets in one place. And then it also has sample social media text and images that you are free to just copy, paste, edit as needed in terms of whatever sort of might be going on locally. So a little bit of a summary here. Michigan is experiencing higher than average annual temperature and precipitation. Air quality is improving, but climate-driven air quality impacts are still a threat to health. There are health risks connected to high temperatures, extreme precipitation, and poor air quality. Didn't want to list them all here, but those slides that we went over. And then, of course, your social, economic, and chronic illness status can impact how exposed and sensitive you are to climate health threats and how much you're able to adapt to protect your health. So really trying to think about in your community who those populations are and working sort of from the ground up or the frontline community, working there first, because that's where we'll see the greatest impact. And then my chat has those educational resources that I just shared, michigan.gov/climate and health, has more information. And then you can also sign up for our newsletter that we just send that out quarterly, so 4 times a year. And then my contact information is there on the screen. And we also have Aaron Ferguson, our unit manager. His email is on there. He has been with the program for a long time, I think 10-ish years. So he has just such a wealth of knowledge of how things have evolved in the state over that time. And how things will just continue to evolve, right? These issues are still things that we're learning more about. We sort of have good projections from partners like Lisa and NOAA and other scientists taking a look at climate trends. So that helps us with a little bit of planning, but just keeping an eye on how that research is evolving too. Okay, so with that, I will stop there, see if there are any questions, and then also grab the link for you for those free copies.
All right, thank you so much, Caroline. I know that I have a few questions, but do others have questions? Let's see, Kat just dropped a link in the chat or a question in the chat. Do you have any examples of communities utilizing this data for planning or education purposes?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I'm trying to think of I don't know, the most interesting example. Right now we're working with Michigan State to select a few communities to do urban planning projects. So their architecture, urban planning PhD students and professors are working on working with the city or a county on a mock-up of what a certain area looks like now that might be impacted by a climate hazard. For example, flooding, an area that might be really prone to floods. And then using some of these data sources, both trying in site selection, where are those flood prone areas? That's kind of step 0. But then once we learn about that flood prone area, thinking about, okay, let's look at the neighborhoods at risk tool. What percentages of people with disabilities, seniors, et cetera, are we seeing in this area? And then when we do our community outreach to try to figure out how we should improve the area to make it less vulnerable to flooding, are we accurate? Are we representing that percentage? of the community in our community meetings, or are we like overrepresented by one group? So that's one example of how communities can use that information.
Another example too is even Marquette County. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. It was pre-pandemic when they were doing some work around community engagement with the climate and health adaptation program. I have a related question actually. So what kinds of things can local governments do when we do see like increased risk for like tick-borne illnesses and whatnot? Like what are ways that local governments can respond? Like there's certainly ways to inform the community, but are there any other like concrete examples that you have, Caroline, of like what local governments are doing to be really proactive about that and help reduce spread of disease?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at least the work that I see from my team's perspective, Easy ID, that emerging zoonotics might answer this question a little bit differently, is that informing the community piece. So, like at parks, making sure that there's information posted about how you can protect yourself from ticks, and then also just making sure, like at community centers, um, like YMCA's, that kind of thing. Like before the season starts, you're sharing that at vet offices. We try to reach out. Our community outreach folks try to make sure vets are sharing information for pet owners. Um, that's the biggest way, I think, from my team's perspective. If I were to sort of make an educated guess on some of the other work that local communities can be doing, I think it's really just coordinating with like DNR, for example, on like if there are areas that need to be like better maintained or something like that, making sure that the connection is established. But yeah, from where I sit, it's probably a different answer than like our ECID team. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that link for the Eagle webinar on flood zones. Yeah.
Yeah, that's coming up May 14th. That's next week. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
I am going to drop in the chat. So I put the where you can order copies of three of our materials. Where if you click on the left hand side, like the climate and health tab, there are actually other topics on there that might be of interest to you, other health topics where you can order free materials. And then if you just want digital copies, this is where we have a list of all of our health education materials.
Mhm.
We're always looking for feedback. So like if you know, are starting to share these out with the community and you're getting more questions than I think answers, we'd love to hear that too. And we do update them multiple times a year. So
a question for some of the communities here too. Are there like some of the health risks that were discussed earlier, are there any in particular that you have more questions about or things that you are seeing in your communities that you don't feel very prepared for? Or maybe things that you do feel really prepared for. Are there examples of work at the local level to help address some of these things more proactively before they become larger issues?
For me, I'm just not really in my, or I haven't thought about it as being in my space. I mean, there may be stuff that Parks is already doing, but like the ticks are getting crazy. Like I was leaving Friday and like I'm in my car and just like I have like all this fruit trees and stuff. And so like it's the time of year where I'm like every day going out there and bathing them and inspecting them. So I got out of my car, looked at one tree for like 10 seconds, then went inside and like set my stuff down. And I had a tick. It's like the only time I was like really outside, like up to that point. It's like what the heck? And like I don't even know that much about them. Like I know enough, like, it takes a while for it, like 48 hours or whatever, and like
Mhm,
for it to transfer anything. But I I and would imagine that the city is not doing a lot of education on that.
mhm,
Um, I could check with the Parks Department, but that was interesting to me seeing like those graphs and stuff.
mhm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Well, even like having residents like take care of brush piles, things like that. Like I have a pile of sticks in my backyard that just kind of keeps growing and creates habitat for them. Um, I also had the thought, Caroline, when you were talking about if communities or DHHS wanted to make like branded tick removal devices. Have you seen those? They're like, they call them like tick keys is one brand, and they can like,
Mhm.
yeah, help take ticks out of your skin. But
I love
Lisa,
it. We were just talking about
yeah,
like branded flashlights and stuff like that for power outages. So yeah,
that's
it's
another
definitely
thing.
a good idea.
Lisa, I saw that you unmuted as well.
Yeah, so I'd say like, from our perspective, because we are pretty well developed from the floodplain risk for flooding, because our stormwater management policies were in good shape. But there's a lot of things that are kind of outside our control. And so you find yourself in only a reactive
Mhm,
stance. So things about the air quality and that sort of thing, that's I don't know what we do about that. I don't know if, at public hearings and that we hear people say, you just have to plant more trees. And I don't know if that has any impact. I'm sure it affects negatively, and there's other impacts for planting trees that are good, like with heat islands and that sort of thing. But I don't know what else we can do for things that are beyond our control, because some
mhm,
of the particulate matter comes from Chicago.
right.
And there's not, to me, a whole lot we can do about that other than, you know, being aware of those action days where it's bad.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So if there's any ideas along those lines, that would be great, but I don't even know what we are doing as a state to combat things that come from elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, so the action days, especially I feel like I've seen those activated in relation to ozone. So like in the summer, when it's hot and then a lot of sunlight and sort of interacting with the particles on the ground. Um, and then so like kind of like the recommendations you see like a lot of the like highway signs and whatnot, like, oh, try to when you're already driving, try not to drive today, that kind of thing. Those kind of make me laugh when I see those. But other things the state's doing is, at least sitting from my team's perspective, that is here. Let me grab the link for you. A lot of it is how people can actually sign up for alerts to learn about air quality in their area. So I put the link in the chat. It comes from that same airnow.gov data. So um, that's the other link I will share. And if you type in Michigan, you'll see that there are um, we could benefit from more air quality monitoring. That's sort of Eagle's jurisdiction and EPA's jurisdiction. So that's sort of one area where communities can advocate. But other than that, dealing with sort of the resources that are in existence right now, having people sign up for those air quality notifications, having people understand how they can just go check airnow.gov, like from their phones or their computers. It's actually built in now to like the weather app. Um,
Mhm.
it might not like it might just be during this summer season. Like, oh yeah, no, it's in there. So like the Apple weather app has the air quality index on there. And then there are really specific like actions that people can take depending on what that air quality level is, and that's some of the resources that I put from our team in that educational resource link.
And
Yeah, so
that's
that's
like
one
an
place.
individual can, I mean, and that's great. I have that on my phone as well. And individuals can do that. But other than getting word out, I'm struggling to see what government can do for some of those items other than making people aware?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I think everyone's sort of grappling with that. One thing that we're pushing for on our end to try to get some funding for our air quality, our air cleaners, portable air cleaners, and thinking about ways we can distribute that in the community. If there are, whether or not the state is able to do that is one question. But if like counties themselves, community-based organizations themselves are going out and applying for funding to do that, that's another avenue to distribute those.
You bring up a really good point, Lisa, though, like you can't plan for every single thing that could go wrong, but more so trying to learn how to, knowing where to find the information and then having a plan for how you're going to communicate it is a big step. And beyond that, there may be some more localized solutions that you can come up with. But yeah, you bring up a really good point. Like we can't actually plan for every single thing. And it's great that we have the federal government that has tools like airnow.gov and all of these wonderful things that the federal government brings us every day to make life run smoothly and safely. So yeah, I think we'll talk about that in the next session too in June. Talking a little bit more about kind of like emergency management preparation and whatnot too.
I also just side note, I just feel like that those resources may be going away from the federal government. So that really concerns me that better to keep people ignorant than think there's something wrong that needs to be fixed by, reducing pollutants and that sort of thing. So that's very troubling to me, but not a whole lot we can do about that other than finding other ways to get the information and communicate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Beatrice, I saw your hand up.
Yes, the city of New York has a really nice program for dealing with urban heat. And also DC has a very nice program. And what I've liked about those two is they focus heavily on heat impact on people. So for New York, for example, they work with their health department, with their health care providers, and developed a module where in-home health providers who go to people's homes to provide service, they developed a module for that. So when they are in their home, as they're evaluating what they are the health care aspect that brought them to come and interact with this patient, they also consider heat as one of the factors that could be making their condition worse. They also looked at the data from the ER and how it's coded, because in most cases, when people present in the ER, they have a heart attack or but then there's no follow-up question on what led into that. So that was also part of that's also part of their program is they work with the healthcare provider so that when people present at ER, that question is asked to determine whether that was a heat-related aggravated case of health. They also worked with their holistically with the health department, with the health care provider, so that even when people have a known condition, they are also asked how that may have been made worse by heat. So if they don't have a good heat management in their home, then that's provided as one of the ways that they can be helped, and they're linked to available resources in the community.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, examples? Okay. Well, let's all give Caroline a round of applause, a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. I know I saw some new tools on there or new to me tools at least, that I hope don't go away. So that I hadn't used before. So I'm looking forward to exploring those a little bit more. So we're gonna go ahead and take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're gonna hear from Cliff Walls, from the city of East Lansing on their wet weather resiliency plan. So feel free to just take a quick bio break here. We'll return at 2 o'clock. Okay. So next we are joined by Cliff Walls with the city of East Lansing to talk about the city of East Lansing wet weather resiliency plan, something that they are in process on right now. So I will hand it over to you, Cliff. Feel free to go ahead and start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Carolyn really kind of teed me up. I feel like there's some good overlap, at least with the flooding stuff, and kind of our version of taking that information that we know, things are changing, bad things are coming. What are we going to do about it? Let's see. I'm assuming you can all see that?
Yes.
Okay. I got three screens up, so I'm finding my way here now that I'm in presenter mode. Okay. Yeah, I'm Cliff, Environmental Sustainability Resiliency Manager for City of East Lansing. In this role, I oversee our urban forestry, recycling initiatives, stormwater regs, our regulatory stormwater stuff, and climate sustainability efforts. It's really broad. Basically, anything that you can see or a resident thinks as green comes to me, which is cool, but it means I can't dive in too deep into any one thing. But before coming to East Lansing, I worked coordinating a stormwater collaborative with 17 permitted MS4s, municipal separate storm sewer system communities, basically those who are required to have a stormwater program in order to discharge to the state. I coordinated 17 local municipalities and worked really close with watershed groups in the area. And that background still really shapes how I approach this work in this role, even though it's different. I still stay really active in that group. I'm the public education chair. We just met last week. And then at noon today, I was with the Michigan Water Environment Association. I'm the chair of the stormwater committee for them. So I'm still really kind of one leg in that world. And that world is mostly like municipal engineers, wastewater plant supervisors, consultants. And so I feel like I straddle a different space than a lot of my sustainability peers do. And that definitely colors the approach that I take to a lot of things, for better or worse. But that's what led me to this project I'm going to be talking about today, our wet weather resiliency plan. And I want to talk about why we launched it, how we're building it, and then hopefully there's some useful lessons for you in your programs. I'm not sure exactly what all you folks on this call do, exactly. Like everyone kind of has their own little piece. But hopefully there's some lessons that you can pull from it. And that was really super related to this, but the background here, I do want to call out, this is an 1890 concept map from John Wesley Powell. It was his proposal to draw Western state lines by watersheds instead of survey grids like they are now. Basically, like Colorado River watershed would be an administrative unit for a state these days. He was an explorer, federal scientist, and I think the second USGS director. And Congress definitely ignored him, and he foresaw the pickle we're in now with water issues, both wet and dry. And while we don't want to take any lessons from him on like community engagement, and he had a very problematic history with Indigenous affairs, but he does have some good lessons for us in the watershed world, and his watershed first vision offers lessons for climate resilience work that we're doing today. And if Michigan would have done similar with our counties and organized by watershed, we'd have a lot less headaches. Where am I at? All right. So I'm guessing that this green communities cohort covers a lot of things like energy, waste, climate mitigation, all that. But my slice here is going to be focused on resiliency and climate adaptation to the changes we're seeing to extreme rainfall, which is why I think Carolyn set me up pretty well here. Because in East Lansing, water is the climate stressor that keeps us up at night. And I also find that a lot of these discussions, not this one seems to be more focused on resiliency and adaptation for my one visit here. But a lot of the sustainability conferences you go to and other cohorts you're in, they're really focused on mitigation and, energy and emissions reductions, which are all incredibly important. And I don't want to discount that at all, but I feel sometimes that climate adaptation is less represented. So I was really happy to see, Carolyn earlier and then this group existing, because we actually absolutely need to be working on both and working on both very intensely. Climate change predictions tell us things are going to get worse, but as we know, those impacts are already here, and we can't lose sight of that when we're planning for our communities. Also, the term resiliency is pretty similar to sustainability in that it's a powerful term, but it can be very broad and it makes it kind of difficult to apply those to specific local challenges and making it more complicated yet. It's not just for environmental issues. It's, the community's ability to withstand and recover from financial stress, infrastructure reliability, social cohesion during crisis, economic shifts, and even within environmental resilience, there's different concerns by location. Some places are more threatened by fire, drought, or water scarcity, or just changes between when the drought and wet conditions or seasons occur. And so while water scarcity is not our problem here in East Lansing, having too much of it certainly is. We're on an old swamp. We have muck soils. We're right on the Red Cedar River. We're just a couple miles upstream of the confluence of the Grand River, which is the state's longest river, and we're in the heart of the state's second largest watershed. And so this geography means that the growing volume of intensity of rainfall, as well as the volume, is among our most significant and growing local challenges here. And as I'll get into with this map behind here, that creates some significant downstream challenges and impacts as well. So for today, when I use the term resiliency in the context of this project, I'm referring to it as wet weather resiliency. This is simply our community's capacity to effectively prepare for, manage, and adapt to stormwater and intense rainfall events. And so practically, this means implementing strategies and building systems that help us absorb, slow down, and safely convey rainwater, snow melt, all that. And our core goal is to minimize the devastating impacts of flooding, basement backups, erosion, water pollution, while also protecting our essential city services. We want to be able to still help people in these events. We don't want people's private property to be damaged. We want people to be, have a well-being preserved before, during, and after these devastating events. So there's going to be a lot of technical stuff I'm going to talk about. And a lot of it probably won't be directly useful to you on a day-to-day basis, but I think being aware of some of these concepts are useful and helpful in general. And it may at least give you a place or a new focus to poke your nose around, or some new, staff units to kind of collaborate with on some of this stuff. And then finally, this image in the background, this is the Grand River watershed. Everything in this red line, that doesn't get evaporated or otherwise used, all discharges to Grand Haven at that one point. And you can think about how many jurisdictions are within here. I think it's, excluding school districts and road commissions and drain offices, I think it's still in the over 80. We're just talking like cities, villages, counties, townships. So all of them are making decisions about land use, infrastructure, stormwater management, and often independently. And when the decisions happen in isolation, it's easy to miss how one change just upstream can impact the downstream and it creates a fragmented system, and it's hard to coordinate with a resiliency mindset in that framework. And so our wet weather resiliency plan just zooms in on one little corner down here somewhere. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Um, but even within that smaller geography, we're looking across systems like mapping subwatersheds, tracking how sewer sheds overlap and interact, and identifying where one neighborhood's runoff can become another's flooding. And by understanding how that full network of how stormwater flows and how decisions are made, um, can affect conditions citywide. And that helps us make more informed, resilient choices. So in East Lansing, we manage quite a network of underground infrastructure, about 124 miles of combined sewer and sanitary pipes, about 63 miles of separated sewer, 4,300 manholes, 3 lift stations. We have a combined sewer tunnel that is 5.1 billion gallons. But a detail about our system and how it connects directly to our environmental resilience, but also the watershed that we're part of and the impacts to that watershed. But a third of the city is a combined sewer. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a single pipe that collects both sanitary waste from homes, toilets and taps, and rainwater runoff from the streets. So in dry weather, all's good. You can't see my cursor, but this one on the right, all the pipes flow to the same place. Dry weather, it's all good. It goes to the treatment plant. When it's overloaded, when you get a big extreme rain event, you get sewer overflows. They're not designed to handle that volume of water, and they discharge the mixture of sewage into local waterways. We're not unique in this. A lot of older towns built before the 50s have this. Lansing has it. Your Pittsburghs, your basically everything out east. I mean, a lot of them have gone through separation efforts, but it's not great. In the other sewer that I mentioned is separated storm sewer. So this keeps things separated. There's one just for your toilets and taps and one just for stormwater. Everything in the sanitary line goes to the plant. When it rains a lot, it's not a big deal. But when you separate that, that means all your runoff, anything that it picks up, is all going directly out into your surface water bodies. And so there's water quality concerns there as well. And so when I talk about like downstream impacts, like anything we're doing here impacts what's happening in Grand Haven or what's happening in Grand Rapids. So it's just an important kind of mindset to come into this topic with. So what are the real world impacts when these systems are overwhelmed? When streets flood in areas in a separated sewer system, it's primarily localized flooding and severe events. This might cause significant disruption like closed roads. You have a flooded yard, your vehicle can get flooded out, businesses and homes are disrupted. But a closed road is more than just an inconvenience. If an ambulance can't drive to your house or a fire truck can't come to your house during an extreme event or get to the hospital, that's going to be a problem. But in the combined sewer area, the situation is often worse. Not only do you have all those problems I just mentioned, but the overloaded pipes can force sewage back up through basements, the lowest fixture in your house, your toilets, your drains, your faucets, whatever's lowest. And because we have a mix of both systems, we experience the worst of both those worlds. We face property damage and disruption of typical stormwater flooding and the immediate health risk that comes with sewage backup in your home. And as an empath myself, I can tell that our residents really don't like that. So there was a specific trigger to this wet weather resiliency plan that I'm going to get into in a second here. It was a series of storms in the summer of 21. So we had a very impactful event hit in August. We had about 7.2 inches of rain in just 6 hours. That was classified as a 1,000-year storm event, and I'll get into what those definitions are in a second. And this single storm immediately triggered hundreds of calls, basement backups, road flooding. We had one house with 9 feet of sewage in the basement, and I think their basement was only 8.5 feet deep. So it was coming out of the first floor. And just a few weeks later, we had lesser volume, but even more intense storm hit again. It was over 2 inches, but it came in 15 minutes. So that overwhelmed the drain capacity due to its intensity. So these events understandably led to residents demanding action to address those vulnerabilities. And this all happened just a couple months before I joined the city. I lived here though. Even though I wasn't working in the city, like during that event, I was pumping out my own house. I live here. I was pumping out my mother-in-law's house for a couple days. So I know what people felt like, even though I wasn't like in the line of fire. Um, but responding to that need early in 22, or maybe it was later in 22, we applied for Eagle wet or high water infrastructure grant. And so this was a pretty unique opportunity. Like it's not available anymore. I think it was a result of all the ARPA money and like post COVID federal influx that was given to the state, and they just needed to push stuff out. Um, but it was managed through their coastal management program, and it might seem kind of counterintuitive that East Lansing, a landlocked mid-state community, would be funded through a coastal high water program. But I did focus a lot on my application, that while we don't border the Great Lakes directly, we are a tributary of many downstream communities like the Grand, or on the Grand River, like Grand Rapids, Grand Haven, and ultimately Lake Michigan. So how we manage our water here and upstream in the Red Cedar, it has direct impacts on both the quality and quantity of water downstream. So also leveraged a lot of my connections down there in Grand Rapids and Elgro and all that, and had them write letters of support. But really, I really hammered in on that connection. Eagle did buy that line, so they gave us $600,000 for this project. It's overall going to cost us probably like $925. We have a lot we have to put into it ourselves. We're 2 years into it. We have about a year left. But you can see here on the slide, planning goals, pretty simple. Establish where and why urban flooding is occurring, identify existing and future severe weather vulnerabilities, and determine an equitable and community-driven approach to climate-resilient stormwater management. And I'll get more into these different steps, but you can see there's quite a few here. June of 26 is when we have to be done, but it'll probably be done January or so. I don't know if this will play. I have a video. It's going to be kind of noisy though, and I'm not logged in where it'd be ads, but you kind of get the idea. I have some pictures as well. But about halfway through this project last summer, we had another really impactful storm, and it ended up being a hard reminder of why this work is so important and urgent. And it really highlighted that we couldn't wait any longer. It helped that we were in the middle of this project, but it showed that it should have been done some time ago, probably. This was in July. We got hit with 2 waves. Do I have other thing? That's what I mean. I didn't want it to happen. Sorry. So this was in July. It was remnants of Hurricane Beryl. In about 12 hours, we picked up 9 inches of rain. Post-storm analysis showed how we were uniquely hit here too. Like MSU has horticulture gauges all over the place. One of them, just down on Farm Lane, like a mile away, had 3.5 inches or something like that. So you can see in this red area here, like the rest of the region, got some rain, but we had 8 to 9 right there. And it's not funny, but kind of funny. My sister's house is literally the center of the star. Like if you zoom in, you can really see which house it is. So I had to give her some crap about that. But this storm actually exceeded the 100 or the 1,000-year event for our area based on data like NOAA's Atlas 14. It was bigger than the storm event we saw in 21. And across the city, we had immediately a lot of calls. All these little dots here on that one on the right are different calls that people self-reported or that responded to our post-event survey. We have an 8 million gallon combined sewer basin and tunnel. Like it has an 8 million gallon capacity. 15 minutes, it was full. So that's what we're talking about, like that level of event. And having this happen while we were working on this resiliency project really underscored while we were doing it. Definitely got the community conversation going. I don't think anyone knew that I was working on this beforehand. But this definitely elevated it in the minds of not only the community, but council. And so I just threw around that term. I heard it, Caroline mentioned it too. We hear the terms 100-year rain, 500-year rain pretty often. But what does it mean? There's a really common misperception that 100-year rain means it only happens once every 100 years, or that if it happened today, you're somehow safe for the next 99 years. That's not true. It's really about the probability, and it describes the annual chance of a rainfall event of a certain intensity occurring in any given year. And we call this the recurrence interval. So a 100-year rain event means there's 1% chance of an event like that happening any given year. 10-year rain is 10% chance, 50-year rain is 2% chance any given year. 1,000-year is 0.01% chance in any given year. So it's kind of like rolling a dice. If you roll a 10-sided die, you have a 10% chance of rolling a 1 every single time you roll it. And just because you rolled a 1 yesterday or the last turn doesn't mean you can't roll it again on your next one. So it doesn't reset. As we learned in East Lansing, you can have multiple statistically rare events happen very close together. So climate change is definitely changing those probabilities, but I do think that's an important distinction to keep in mind, because we hear from people all the time, well, we just had a 100-year storm, like we're supposed to be good for 9 decades. Like, no, it does not work like that. That 1,000-year rain event broke the scale. So this example here that you can see, this scale, I have it highlighted. 10-year 24-hour event would be 3.38. And we had in 8 to 9 hours 9 inches. Like, this goes up to 1,000-year rain. Like, if I could fit the full picture, but it broke the scale. Like, Noah's Atlas 14 is the standard, and there just wasn't a recurrence interval for what we actually saw. It was that big. So why does this matter? This matters because recurrence intervals are how stormwater infrastructure and roads are designed. So engineers use these recurrence intervals and the associated rainfall data to decide how big the pipe's going to be, the number of drains they need, the capacity of the detention area. And when they select a storm, they call it the design storm. So for example, a community might use something like a 10-year, 24-hour storm as the design storm. That's very common in the Midwest. This means that that system is designed to handle the volume and intensity of that specific 10-year, 24-hour event for that geography, that physical location, without street flooding. Like, you wouldn't see surface ponding on the street. And so for East Lansing, a 10-year, 24-hour storm, again, means 3.38 inches over a 24-hour period. And it sets an expected level of service for managing that level of rainfall before the system gets overwhelmed, and dictates expectations of the system. And after these events, or the news, or you hear from residents, the stormwater system failed. And conceptually, yes, I get that. The thing the resident expects to keep water away didn't keep water away. But from an engineering perspective, it didn't fail. It just met something that it wasn't designed to do. And expecting that a road that's designed to a 10-year storm would stay dry in a 1,000-year rain event is like thinking an umbrella is going to keep you dry in a hurricane. It's just not designed for that. It doesn't make it any less impactful for people, but the term fail is kind of thrown around there a lot. But a design storm is something that you really have to set, and it's based on budgets, standards, expectations. And, the important thing is we know what is it truly a 10-year storm is kind of changing underneath us. But exceeding the design is not really a surprise. You factor in a level of risk. So the issue with those standardized interval charts is that they're always backwards looking. They're looking at observed data. They do not factor in climate change. There's some upcoming changes to NOAA Atlas 14, NOAA Atlas 15, it'll be called, which will have a climate factor, but that's still probably 3 years away. If NOAA exists at that point. They're also really slow to update. So a lot of communities use another standard called Huff and Angel. The last time that was updated was 92. So at best, you're managing today's or yesterday's storms and not tomorrow's. And natural watersheds, they can change. If you get a big rain, if the climate changes, they can reshape their channels, they can increase their capacity, handle bigger flows. But gray infrastructure is a network of pipes that are very rigid. It has fixed dimensions. It can't adapt to these new higher intensity conditions. And that rigidity is a core vulnerability in urban stormwater management. And it leads to flooding when those fixed components are overwhelmed and meet rainfall that they weren't designed to handle. So given this, the first goal of our wet weather resiliency plan was to move beyond just relying on these regional historical charts. This is what everyone uses. It wasn't like something we're behind on. These are just the industry standard. But we wanted to understand our actual local reality, like not the Great Lakes region, not Michigan, not the county. What's happening here? So we need to understand, our conditions that we experience. So we commissioned an analysis to figure out what a 10-year, 100-year, and even a 1,000-year rain event has actually looked like here, going back on the observed record through 1949. And what that analysis looked like was concerning, but nothing surprising. We know climate change is happening. But between 1949 and 2023, the annual rainfall volume here in East Lansing is up about 30%. More critically, the really short, intense cloudburst events, downpours, are up about 75%. So this clearly shows that we're dealing with not just more rain, but it's coming faster, it's more intense. And that intensity is the significant challenge with stormwater. A slow, steady rain gives our pipes and the receiving watersheds, like I mentioned, the separated storm sewer goes out to your local streams, creeks, rivers, lakes, depending on where you're at. Gives them time to handle the increase of water that it's accepting not only from you, but from the natural watershed. I mean, that huge watershed that I showed you. But these high intensity rains hit like a shock, and it quickly fills the pipes, causes surcharges, like you can see in this graphic here. You'll see a label, the hydraulic grade line. So when that grade line rises above the ground, that's where the water is going to go. Gravity, elevation always wins. We're not really in the traditional floodplain. It's not like the water itself from the river basin is going to cross over and flood out our homes. Like that's obviously a possibility, but we're not in the super high risk area for that. But it doesn't mean that you're out of the woods. Just because if there's nowhere else for that water to go and the hydraulic grade line is so high, there's going to be back system impacts. And so the volumes of rain associated with those 10-year, 1,000-year events, we updated those to reflect the reality. And I'll get in more of how we're accounting for intensity, but historically we've seen it's way more than what the charts and these broad estimates would guess. So we updated our standards here, or like what our DDF curves are. So after looking back, the next step was to look forward. So we need to project how these extreme rainfall patterns, especially the super intense ones, are expected to change here in East Lansing over the coming decades due to climate change. So for this, we worked with climatologists, hydrometeorologists, and they assessed the outcomes specifically for East Lansing, our location, using a multitude of global climate models under two different future scenarios. So one scenario was when emissions, we meet our goals, we kind of start tracking down by 2030, and we're kind of on a good path. The other one is where things just kind of go unabated as they mostly currently are. We also looked at the effects of Lake Michigan. So sometimes those broad regional guesses don't account for your actual location, like how close we are to Lake Michigan. And, we know the heat is, temperatures are rising, so we're going to have more evaporation. There's going to be more vapor. When it comes across the land, it's going to cool and it's going to rain more. So all that stuff was factored in, the Great Lakes influence as well. So because we know and found that our most impactful storms are not in the traditional design storm of 24 hours, like I mentioned, that's like a long, steady rain. We focused our attention on the 6 and 12-hour storms to better represent those increases in intensities. And so for us, by the year 2100, if we meet our emissions targets, we're expecting about an 8% increase in rainfall volume. If things go unabated, those same extreme depths or extreme rainfall events could increase volumes up to 20%. Some of the literature says 30% for the Great Lakes region. I know Eagle is about to institute a 10% climate factor for their stormwater permitting. So we're kind of in the middle there. But again, this is looking not what's happening in Grand Rapids, not what's happening in Mount Pleasant, factoring in like the spatial and topography changes for us. And so this gives us a critical picture into the future conditions of our infrastructure or of the weather events that our infrastructure will have to handle. So it means that a pipe that we're installing today that has an 80-year life cycle, we want to make sure that it's built to survive and function under future conditions that are going to be wetter and more intense. So we have to design for the future climate, not the past, not today's. In order to do that, we have to update these standards and reflect those future volumes into that design storm. It's not all you have to do, but it's a foundational step. So based on the historical trends, we analyze the future projections from the climate models. And the next step was to create the city-specific rainfall data for those for how we design our infrastructure, like the 10-year, 24-hour, 100-year, 12-hour, all that. So taking that information, did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. We developed what the engineers would call a depth duration frequency, or DDF table. Again, specifically for us. And these tables and curves replace those older ones I was talking about, like Huff and Angel and NOAA Atlas 14. Those are traditionally used by us, others all around the country. But these aren't just for a report. They're, really feed into our practical decisions about how big do our pipes need to be? How much is it going to cost us to do a capital improvement project if we need to increase pipe sizing and, have other stormwater BMPs present? But they also inform something we call a level of service, which I will get into in a bit here. But that helps us define exactly what level of storm event our infrastructure should be designed to handle, and what level of service is expected by the community. And, not just the community, but what do we need to provide so our emergency responders can get down the road? What's their level of service minimum requirements? I think it's 6 inches. They can get through 6 inches of water. So they kind of factor that stuff in. So in other words, we have the most accurate East Lansing specific rainfall numbers available for our engineers and planners to base their future designs and plans on. Again, it's a really fundamental piece of this. So we also asked, what does a typical worst case storm look like? So we looked at the 12 biggest storms that we've had and produced these 6 and 12-hour graphs that show us the intensity and the rainfall pattern during those historical events on the observed record, which begins at 1949. And that pattern showed kind of what we've seen, anecdotally. It's a 2-hour dump, pause, dump, burst. And that's exactly what we saw last July in 24 and in 21. And so once we identified the spatial, as I mentioned, temporal and volume distribution across the city for a typical storm. We know kind of how the weather patterns typically move across our specific geography. It gives us a really good understanding of what a typical storm is, and that's what we call a representative storm. This is important because we plug that into the cornerstone of this whole project, which is our 2D hydraulic and hydrologic model. So this model is of our entire drainage network, both the combined sewer, and also the separated sewer. And it was built using field surveying and historical as-built. So we tear through all of our records, how big is this pipe, or is it turned? What kind of fitting is on it? For every pipe in the city. And this has taken forever. But we also put flow sensors, velocity sensors in our drainage network, so we could calibrate, or more so verify and validate this model. But it not only is looking at how the flow is through the pipes, it's also using a surface mesh. So basically, crooks and crannies, elevation changes, and all that. So you can kind of think of it as a digital sandbox. So it lets stormwater engineers, planners, and decision makers see where water will go, experiment with different solutions on a laptop instead of bulldozers, and justify investments with clear, shareable visuals all before the next storm comes. And so we have this detailed sandbox of the whole city we have the ground surface. Every street, crown, dip, yard, creek bank is recreated in a high resolution elevation data, like a high resolution topographic map. And then under that, we have a virtual representation of our pipes and their sizes and their material, because they have different factors of, velocity. Some pipes are going to slow it down more than, if it's a rough concrete versus PVC. So instead of watching flow down a single line, which would be a 1D model, we have it in 2 dimensions, both the length and the width across the surface as well. So we can pour, like, pretend you're raining on, processing different design storms, like I mentioned, like the 10-year, 24-hour storm. Or, hey, what happens if we get a 500-year rain event, but it's in 2080, and we know it's going to be even more intense? Where are we going to have problems? So we're going to know how fast and how deep the water gets on each little square of ground, like down to the parcel level, sub-parcel level. How much water the pipes can allow before they'll start pushing back and surcharging, and then where the water is going to go next. So is it going to overtake this curb? Is it going to go to this building? Is it going to go to the river? All that kind of stuff. So it looks kind of like a color-coded movie where you can see the water expand and contract, showing the streets that are going to flood, the parcels that are going to take on water, the structures that are going to be vulnerable, and key routes that may be passable or not. So like I mentioned, you can plug in 500-year rain event, 1,000-year rain event today. You can put it at the end of the life of the project you're putting in and see, like, what kind of level of service are you getting from that. And you can test these fixes. You can put interventions into the system. Like, I'm going to put a stormwater facility or a large detention rain garden area here, and you can see what the impact would be, all before you spend millions of dollars on doing that. Helps you set priorities, because you can combine those results with social equity data, traffic counts, emergency routes, and protect people and property that is most, critical. Like, all people are critical, but like, if there's, one that's going to help one household, or you can, spend the same amount of money and help a larger number of people. But also helps us tell the story, because this stuff is going to cost a lot of money, and we want to be able to make sure that people are on board with it. So, yeah, one thing I do want to mention is, like, this is not something that you just like throw on your laptop and toggle with every scenario. It's something that, like running in one new piece of data is going to cost you $5,000 or $10,000, and you're going to have a consultant do it. They're incredibly advanced calculation engines on super expensive software that we don't even have the licenses to, because they're like out of reach for most communities. You have a consultant who has hundreds of different clients, and they do it. So it's not like a module. This is something a little more advanced. It's not something you can just play with. You have to be very intentional about the usage of it. So, as I mentioned, infrastructure like roads and storm sewers are designed to those specific measurable performances. And again, this is called the design storm, and most use something like a 10-year, 24-hour storm for roads and drainage. In our case, that means, again, 3.38 inches for a 24-hour period that would be able to fall without causing surface ponding or other impacts. We would call that the level of service. Same thing as a design storm, but kind of from another perspective of, like, this is the expectation we can have for the performance of this infrastructure. I'm starting to lose my voice. I've been in Zoom all day. I had to chair another meeting before this. So sorry about that. But this project was really thinking through whether a fixed service target really makes sense everywhere. And, what if instead we ask, is it okay to allow a little bit of water and more flooding in one place if it protects something that's more critical elsewhere? Maybe we can accept that we get frequent ponding in a part of a residential street that's low traffic if it means that the hospital route is going to be open during a big event. Flooding a park, maybe even intentionally, or some other low priority zone, which would let us avoid damage at a commercial district or, group housing, multifamily housing. And these are trade-offs that we can make. You can see this example here. Like, I wouldn't really consider this a problem, which I know sounds weird. Like it sucks if you live there, but like in an event where you may be able to expect that to go down in 15 minutes, if emergency vehicles can go through that and there's not structure damage, that's a win. In a 1,000 year rain event, like kiss your lucky, you know, stars. Um, but if you could plan for that and know that like the storage capacity in that road is protecting a major infrastructure or major intersection, that may be worth it just from a safety standpoint. But those are trade-offs that we can't decide. That needs to be a community decision. So there's another phase of this project, which is including focus groups with residents, neighborhood leaders, renters, business owners, kind of walk through these different scenarios and let them see what that means. Like, the actual design storm, they can calculate and visualize like what the impact would be, to the thing that they're a stakeholder of. And so it gives us in the focus groups an ability to more understand and visualize those problems and how small tweaks to the system can impact conditions, where they are or in another neighborhood. And like I said, sometimes those conditions aren't even bad. There's so much capacity that roads can hold. If we're strategic about which roads are holding some weather or some wet weather capacity, we may be able to protect a lot of downstream impact, and that trade-off may be worth it. So it's important to note that tweaking those pipe sizes and the levels of service, all that stuff I just talked about, is like a gazillion-dollar overhaul of an entire city network. It's nothing that you're going to do immediately. It's something that you're going to be able to afford to do immediately, and it's not even going to be that broadly effective for these huge events. So what's going to be more useful for us is stormwater facilities, like big capital improvement plan projects. So I'll just like show another slide here. Like things like this, like underground detention under a park, but while maintaining the land use, using a vacant piece of land to, hold a bunch of water. The levels of service design storm, that's very helpful for development standards and long-term planning. And you might as well do it when you're fixing a road anyways. But if we're talking about like resiliency to these larger storms, it's going to be something much more than that. So for this project, we are modeling 8 different CIP, capital improvement plan projects. And that's just what we decided on for the scope and for how much money we have for this. But that's like a good amount for us to settle on. And then the hard part will be deciding which one to prioritize. Like which of these like proven by the model to be like impactful fixes are going to be useful and have meaningful reductions in stormwater volumes. In East Lansing in particular, I'll say like we have some loud voices, like people who are the frequent flyers who are typically the ones who are in council's ear. And we don't want this to be something where like our richest or loudest or most connected residents somehow influence where these projects go, assuming we can afford them. And we're not there yet. So to ensure that we have like an equitable distribution and that we're addressing objective need, we have this multi-criteria decision matrix that is weighted. So this is actually not ours. We have a different draft. This is just from the proposal. There's like equity considerations, maintenance, overall cost is obviously baked into there. Ecological value, kind of talking about the stormwater overflows into the river. But it's basically a scoring tool that helps us evaluate different potential projects by scoring them on a range of different factors, weighted on how important they are to the overall wet weather resilience, but also to community goals. And so that's another effort of that focus group or multiple focus groups that we're convening. I think I need to hurry up here. And so we're using social vulnerability indexes, the number of properties saved, ease of maintenance, and all of that. So we're excited, to kick off these focus groups. It's going to be coming very soon, probably like in June, and excited to see what comes out of that. Again, those are just some pictures of the types of CIP projects that are likely to come out of something like this. So yeah, this is my last slide, so I guess I am good on time. So I recognize a lot of you here are probably not seated right next to your engineering department like I am, or like as looped in on the kind of engineering world as I just happen to be with my position here. But a lesson that I think I want you to walk away from is that your engineering colleagues, the DPWs, which is where I work, and their focus on these infrastructure challenges can be a valuable resource and partner for your broader sustainability resiliency efforts. So they're often charged with dealing with the physical impacts of climate change, like extreme weather, on the ground every day, whether they call it climate change or climate adaptation or not. And their job inherently involves planning the performance and the construction of infrastructure that is meant to last for decades, in decades that we expect a lot of change. And so the specific work that they're working on is infrastructure resilience. Um, and it's fundamentally tied to climate resilience in my mind. And it aligns with those critical real world challenges that we're all trying to solve. And without their buy-in, without their funding, without their support just in staff, like I would never be able to push this project along. And what I think kind of the lesson is, like, I would not have this really cool 40-page climate report about what's going to happen in East Lansing specifically and our specific vulnerabilities if I wasn't working with the engineering department to support their infrastructure project. I mentioned I work on urban forestry. That report's helping us select what species we need to start looking at planting because we're gonna have a wetter environment. What kind of new species from more existing wet areas do we need to be planting? Like we are mostly natives, but we adhere to right tree, right place. Like the right of way is not a native. Those are creating non-native conditions, and we're putting these trees up against stuff they're not used to. So we need to be strategic about species selection, and this report's helping with that. I also work on the stormwater regulatory stuff, not just our internal, but like how we regulate others. And so this is informing our development standards around the community, and we have a committee working on that as well. And so it also benefits them because like they probably wouldn't have thought to use like the keywords that I did. Like they've needed something like this for a long time and wanted it but couldn't fund it. And through a resiliency sustainability grant, I took it over, kind of used the keywords of the time like resilience and environmental justice and things that probably wouldn't score super high in some federal grants today. Um, but they get a modeling project that they need, and then I get the benefits off of that as well. And so you don't always need like a brand new initiative. You can plug into some of these existing projects or some of the existing wish list and kind of help them come to reality. And so my encouragement to you would be to reach out to your engineering teams, learn about the specific and practical infrastructure studies and challenges they're working on, and perhaps help them frame it in a different way and broaden the scope of what they're working on to highlight those environmental and resiliency co-benefits. Now my voice is gone. But here I do like it was one of those grants where they were just throwing money out there, like need to get it quick. So it was like a one pager. But I have my application up there. I have the scope if anyone's curious about like the nuts and bolts. The climate report, it's just on a Google Drive. There's a bunch of other stuff I could put on there too if people are interested, but I just threw some interesting deliverables outputs from that could hopefully help you in your efforts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cliff. We have about 7 or 8 minutes left for Q&A. There's a ton of threads that I could pull on here from that presentation, but there are a couple questions in the chat. The first one from Kat, asking about the combined sewer. Is that the third of the city that has the combined sewer? Is that due to the age of the infrastructure?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like anything built before 1950 was typically combined. And so that's like the core older part of town. And sometime in the 90s, the city made a decision to not separate it, created like into Lansing is going through it. They just have a small portion left of their combined to separate.
Mhm.
And pre-COVID prices, it was $300 million for a small portion. We have our whole town like some point, city leadership decided to build that retention basin that I talked about. So there's like that 8 million gallon tunnel. So like in theory, a combined system dumps out into the local waterways, and ours it backs up to the basin, and then just it's a staging area until there's capacity at the plant. If it's a crazy storm like we had in July, we do discharge to the river, but that tunnel it separates it. It set or separates not the right term. It separates the solids, settles it, screens it, and chlorinates it to disinfect it. So it's still not good, but it's not like E. coli is going straight out into the river. It's like a in between, and that was super expensive, but it was probably like an eighth of the cost back in the 90s. And you have to cut down every tree in town to get under the right of way, basically. So that was the decision somebody made. But other communities are just separating it instead, or just leaving what they have.
Okay. Yeah, talking about decisions too. I mean, you're talking a lot here about, so your background, remind me your educational background. What was your degree in?
Policy, actually, but I
Okay.
ended up getting more of a science and things. But
Yeah, I was gonna say you're not an engineer, but you've done an excellent job of communicating things that are really, doing science communication, right? And so how do you, what are some recommendations that you have for all of us here on how to become better science communicators? Are there any resources out there or anything that has helped you in this journey?
um, I think, I mean, it's not really a good answer, I guess. But for me, I just I came into this and was once somebody who had zero idea about like what all this stuff was. Like, talking about DDF curves and all that. And so I always just try to think back of like when I learned it and like what's a way to make this sound useful to an average resident or just an average Joe. As far as communicating that, um, broadly, like one thing I saw that was very useful in the community, I showed that image of the surcharging sewer. We had a lot of people after that event, as Danielle well knows, as a East Lansing resident, who were like going on Facebook and saying that we were shutting off the system. We were trying to save the system by plugging our drains remotely, which is not how a passive system works. That just doesn't work that way. But I understand why they thought that because this drain all of a sudden stopped draining, and then 5 seconds later it just starts. Like the only thing they could think of was it got unplugged, and somebody did that. So the response to that, not directly to those Facebook posts, but like the educational material we put out was that surcharge map. Like a lot of people aren't thinking about the river impacting their home when they're a mile and a half away. And, it's not like it's overtaking the bank and flooding them out. But the fact that the river is swollen is why their drain clogged. Well, not clogged, it's surcharged because there's just nowhere for that water to go. The hydraulic grade line is just, matching they're at a lower area. And so it's just the system, it's like hooking a hose between two 5 gallon buckets and changing the way they are. Like you're going to impact each other, even though they're not like physically visibly connected as like the two buckets are one bucket. Like they're separate buckets, but you're creating the hydrological connection there or hydraulic connection there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like image, like I literally just took a piece of scrap paper after somebody texted me that, and I drew that up and then sent it to my comms team because I was like, this is the best way to think about it that I can think of. And they turned it into like an actual Photoshop or Illustrator image.
Mm-hmm.
And we just posted that online, and now we've been using that a lot. Like it really seems to sink in with people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a visual way of saying like what would have helped me when I was learning this.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I take it.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes.
I guess broadly, you now have more data and more modeling of rainfall in your system than you've ever had before. Did anything really surprise you as you move through this process in terms of your stormwater system and rainfall in East Lansing?
The 75% increase in 1 hour rain events surprised me. Like I knew it was up, but 75% was quite a lot. Um, we, yeah, that really surprised me. And what also surprised me is like one of the PR challenges that we have is like people seem to think that we are uniquely bad at managing stormwater, which I would not say is the case. Like East Lansing's long been a leader. Um, but it's because like they go to the neighboring community or they have friends in the neighboring community. They didn't have those problems. And it was really surprising to see like the post-storm analysis, which I have in that QR code of like the specific July of 24 storm. It uniquely hit us like that one spot. It wasn't like downstream of that they got 9 inches too. It was like that was just the hot spot. And like the explanation is it's just topography, like clouds move over the land and they hit a cell phone tower, they hit a little bump. Like it's just all those little butterfly effect things. But like when you really break it down, um, like we had worse outcomes because we had worse conditions, It wasn't like it was apples to apples. Well, their system handled it better. Like, well, no, they just didn't get that. It was like a cloudburst event right on top of us. And like I mentioned, MSU had a rain gauge a mile away from that spot. It was 3.4 inches or something. And we had 9. So it's just that like people don't really think about that. And it makes it really hard to message on. Like, no, everything's not, we don't need to scrap everything. It's just we had a really bad day.
Mhm.
We need to do more, but it's not like we're miles behind our neighbor to the east.
Mhm. Any other questions? Kat, I saw you have a question in the chat here. How do you frame, do you only have like another minute or two to answer, but how do you frame the conversation of upscaling new stormwater infrastructure projects for climate change with your city leadership? For example, building them larger and needing more money. What types of data or talking points do you find effective to communicate with them?
Um, for us, we don't need to sell it. Like they're
Okay.
on us to do it. Like it's East Lansing. It's a college town, very pro, you know, environment. Climate change has been on the radar for a long time. Um, but I think when we get down to the nuts and bolts of what things are going to cost, it's going to be a challenge. And I think it's probably going to elevate a stormwater utility conversation in the community. Um, but I think when you talk about the fact that you're making investments now that you expect to last for 80 to 100 years, or depending on the location, but these are long-term investments, and I mean you could compound the like what is that extra X dollar that you spend today? What is that X dollar going to be 80 years from now? Like you can make the economic argument to meet that level of service that you need. Um, but at least here for me, that's not been the challenge. It's been kind of the opposite. Like, how do we get them to slow down and let us get all the data we need before they want to change everything? So that's been a unique challenge for us. But I think these aren't like a fence that you put in a park and we need this, and it costs us $10,000. It's like this thing's going to be under there for a long time, and you got to tear up the road and tear up trees. You might as well do it right the first time.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. We're coming up on time here. This was a really great presentation, Cliff and Caroline as well. Thank you both for your presentations. We can give you both another round of applause here, virtual round of applause. So thank you. Cliff, can people reach out to you with questions if they come up?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen super quick. Just a couple, wrap up housekeeping things. Okay, yeah, you're seeing it. Okay. So our next session is Wednesday, June 11th, 1 to 3 p.m. On emergency management and local hazard mitigation planning. We're going to be joined by Michigan State Police and their emergency management division. I'll send out the prep work in an email as well. If you haven't already, complete the community profile and the MGC template sustainability plan, and I'll send you a link for that. And then also find and skim your county's hazard mitigation plan. It may not be current. You may need to do a little digging for it, and it may need to be updated actually. So just kind of know where to find that. And two things to do this month. By May 15th, if you haven't already, complete the Michigan Green Communities Challenge to maintain access to benefits like this. Additionally, there's going to be a webinar on June 4th. The league is technically hosting it, but it's open to all communities in the state on the Energy Navigators program. I will send some more details on that, but I'll be hosting that webinar talking about a couple free TA opportunities that are super impactful. So I will send that out in the email. That's all we've got for today. But thanks everyone. If you have other questions and whatnot, feel free to reach out at any point. Thanks for joining us today.